30 days, so to speak, learning about a holiday. Okay, but first we will start off with our sponsors, and I'll pick up from what we left Friday and Shabbos as well. A year of learning, Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Ruven ben Labush, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Romberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mayan, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. The many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Peres, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Arav Shimon, friends of Joe Wolf, in memory of Joe Yosef ben Chaim, Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edel Bas Yaakov. Finished Friday was Ruth Burian and Judy and Edward Boehm for a month of learning, in memory of Ruth and Judy's mother, Hadassah bat Azriel Zelig Miriam, and father Yitzchak ben Yosef Esther. Continuing for a month of learning, Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of her father, Yaakov ben Yosef, B. Pizer, in memory of her mother, Razel bat Shammai, and her stepfather, Avram Michal ben Shmuel Halevi. Josh and Carol Sanborn, in memory of his mother, Chiena bat Aryeh Leib, and his father, Shmuel Aryeh ben Baruch. Mel and Haran Haller, in memory of his mother, Fega bas Yaakov. Andrea and David Dolney, in memory of her mother, Edel Tzina bas Shimshon. Finished Friday was a week of learning by Sandra and Marty Levine and Brenda Parver, in memory of Sandra and Brenda's mother, Chaya Hudel bas Yaakov Leib, and their father, B'Tselel ben Avraham Yehuda. Also finished Friday was a week of learning in memory of by the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Esther Shepatovsky, in memory of Esther Riva bas Chazan B'Tzalel. Also finishing Friday was a week of learning by Sid Peres, in memory of his mother, Yehudit bat Tzvi, and his father, Chaim ben Aaron Kohen. Continuing a week of learning, Mark and Catherine Linder, in memory of his nephew, Ezra Paul ben Shirlus. A finished Friday was a day of learning plus Torah Fund, sponsored by Mimi Schiff, in memory of her mother, Chaya bas Daniel. Also finished Friday, a day of learning plus Suda Shlishit Fund by Sharon Smith, in memory of her husband, Yehuda ben Yisrael. A day of learning finished Friday by Rabbi Moshe Kranzler, in memory of his wife, Esther Riva bas Chazan B'Tzalel. Saturday, Shabbos, was a day of learning by Gary Cooperberg, in memory of his father, Pesach ben Meir. And today, a day of learning by Milton and Gail Meller, in memory of his mother, Rivka bas Menachem Mendel. May the Neshamas have an Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti, Yashir, Hashem, Matzliah, Chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Geben Shtiar.
Amen.
Okay. All right. Marvin, are you there? Okay.
Here.
All right. So I just want to check with those that have been ongoing. My intent this morning was to start on Sadi Chet Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom with the Gemara. But I could start earlier if people did not get a chance to cover much of the rest of Sadi Chet. I could start with the Mishnah. What's your pleasure, gentlemen?
You can start wherever you start with the Gemara if you want. Start wherever you want.
I'm up to the Gemara.
start with the Gemara? Okay.
Yep.
All right, because today's daf is relatively short, so that's why I wanted to check with everybody first. Okay? All right. Remember, we've been dealing here with a long Mishnah. Okay? That what happens if a person left the Chabura, the group they were registered in, okay? And as a result, and they told him, well, go get us another Korban Pesach because we lost, ours was lost, okay? And the Mishnah discussed what happens in that kind of a scenario. Do they give him authority? Don't they give him authority? Does he tell them, include me if the animal comes back, or don't include me? So that's the scenario. We really get four different kinds of situations. So the Gemara on Sadi Chet, Amud Beis, 3 lines up from the bottom, starts with a Braita. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita, Amar Lehen, if he says to them, in other words, implying, include me in, Va'amru lo, and they say to him, well, if you get to find an animal in place of the one and we didn't find it, slaughter that one for us and include us. Ochel min harishon. Okay, they can eat from whichever is the first animal to be appropriately slaughtered. Gemara picks up. Lo amar lehen, velo amru lo. If it was the opposite scenario, where he never said to them, include me, okay, if the animal comes back, or they never said to him, we'll include you, okay, if the animal comes back, things like that. What happens? Einan achra'in ze lazeh. One group has, or he, neither the individual nor the group left without that individual has responsibility for the other. Okay, and so therefore we could have a situation where we've already seen an example of the one person perhaps having a Korban Pesach slaughtered on his behalf, which we saw previously, according to Rabbi Yehuda, was a problem. Okay, so our Gemara starts off on the Tzadi Tet, today's daf, with the following. Mikan Amru, from here, from this scenario, Chachamim, the sages said, Yafesh dika lechachamim, that there's an advantage, a benefit for when sages are silent. What's the benefit? Well, if you did not include the individual, right? If that's the case, and he did not include them, the implication is you have now 2 different Pesach offerings with the result that each gets eaten and none is left over. All right, so that would be the benefit of being silent. Kal v'chomer l'tipshim, says the Gemara. How much more so for those that are inadequate, knowledgeable, okay? The fools, all right? Why? Shnei Amar, says the pasuk, Avil macharish chacham yechashev. That the simple person, if they're silent, okay, would be almost considered equivalent to a sage under those circumstances. Namely, by being silent, he ultimately has done something appropriate. Okay. Since we gave that example of one person extracting themselves from the registered group, we come back to a situation of, we said, an individual having a Korban Pesach being offered. Let's say we have a situation, says the Mishnah. We now come back to saying that there were 2 individuals, each one looking to have a Korban Pesach offered on their own behalf. Says the Mishnah, Shnayim shenitarvu psuchehem v'chulei. But their 2 animals got mixed up. what do they do? Under what's the circumstances? Lema matnitin de loka Rabbi Yehuda. If that's the case, it would mean that we would have to say that our Mishnah doesn't follow the view of Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanya, because a Braita teaches, okay, namely the following: Im yima'et habayit mihiot miseh. If the house is reduced to having only the animal. In other words, what happens if all of the registrants remove their names? That's not permitted. Milamed shemit ma'atin v'holchim ubilvad sheyehe echad mibnei chavura kayam. Says Rabbi Yehuda, according to the Braita, that it's permissible to reduce the number of registrants in the group eating a Korban Pesach together, and reduce it down, but to no more than one, so long as there is still at least one of the original members registered participating. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer, says Rabbi Yossi, Ubilvad shelo yanichu et haPesach kamot shehu. According to Rabbi Yossi, so long as you do not leave the Pesach offering, okay, as it is, or what we might say, on its own, without any registrants. Now, Rabbi Yochanan responds, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Afilu tema Rabbi Yehuda. You might say that our Mishnah could be considered as according to the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Kivan da Amar Rabbi Yehuda. What? Because Rabbi Yehuda has said elsewhere, okay, Ein shochtin et haPesach al hayachid, that we're not permitted to slaughter a Pesach offering on behalf of a single individual. Namely, me'ikara la'amnuye acharina bahedye kai. Namely, originally, one should register another person along with the existing individual. Uke'echad mipnei chavura dami. And then that later registrant would be considered just like one of the original registrants. Okay? Now, Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi is going to say, Matnitin nami daika. He argues basically in agreement with Rabbi Yochanan that we could still say our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Excuse me. Why? Because he says the language of our Mishnah is exact. Namely, it teaches the Katani, B'chein chamesh chavurot, shel chamisha chamisha. Let's say you have, 5 different registered groups, and each group has 5 participants, right? Shel chamisha, and yes, then the example of our Mishnah is appropriate. People could reduce their number, okay? And then one could go, the last group, if from the, let's say you have 4 groups of 5, and the 5th group starts reducing its number, okay? Because 4 members could go to the other 4 groups, and you'd still have 1 person left, okay? And then Rabbi Yehuda says, since you can't have a Pesach offering just for 1 person, that 1 person could go find another individual, and we're set, okay? He says, this is what Rav Ashi's explanation is. Aval shel chamisha va'arba'a lo. But that only works when you have five different register groups. If you only have 4 different groups, it doesn't work. Lav mishum de lo fiesh chad mi b'nei chavura gabe. Is it not because if you start and you have one only remaining, okay, how does that apply towards the last group? If you only had 4 groups, right, and you had 5 people in each group, right, they would all have to go to another group. Then the Korban Pesach would be without anyone. And therefore the suggestion of our Braita doesn't apply. Shmamina. Indeed, that's what we learned from this. Adranalach mishaya tame uslika la pesach sheni. Okay? So if the 5th group only had 4 registrants, and then they go to the other 4 groups, none are left.
Right.
And therefore, the solution of the Braita, according to Rabbi Yehuda, then doesn't work. Now, let's go to our new parak.
But
Yes.
4 and 4 would work too, right, Rabbi? If you had 4 and 4, 3 and 3.
4 and 4 would work, right? Because you could have 3 people
Right.
from the group of 4 go to 3 other, right? And then you could still have 1 left, and he could register somebody else. Exactly. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. Sadi Tet Amud Beis. We start our new parak, and we're going to deal now with some additional information. Okay. So far, the last parak dealt with when it's permissible to eat, under what regarding the registrants, and regarding how the Korban Pesach was to be slaughtered, what the time of the slaughtering was. So we learned from there that the time of slaughtering usually began midday. Okay? And remember, we're talking about what's called sha'ot zmaniot, time that are hours that are not 60-minute hours, but they are hours designated by the amount of daylight in a day, and that is divided up into 12 sections. Okay? Now, as we begin the new parak and the new material, we're going to see a couple of issues at the very outset. The very first item, as an introduction, is the very title of the Mishnah and the parak. Because if you look at the top of the Amud, we see it says Arvei Psachim. But if you look at our Mishnah, it says Erev Psachim. So already the language of the beginning statement of the Mishnah forces the Mefarshim to deal with a linguistic issue. Okay? And there is a difference between Tosafot and Rashi here. Just quickly to point it out as we start the Mishnah. Many texts start Arvei Psachim, okay? Some start Erev Psachim, which Tosafot says means, okay, specifically the case that if you say it the Pesach afternoon, at the afternoon of each yearly Pesach that we have to deal with, okay? As opposed to Pesach afternoon approaching the time of slaughter till the time of darkness for eating. Okay? And just quickly looking at the Tosfot there, Igar Sinan Arve Necha, he says, if we use that language, it's acceptable. V'igar Sinan Erev. and if we use the one. And he points out, Hachi Kamar, etc., Erev Sheshochtin Bo Psachim. He says the night or the afternoon in which we slaughter a number of Pesach offerings. Inami, Erev Pesach Rishon V'Sheni. Or else we could interpret it as Arve, meaning both Erev Pesach first occasion, 14th of Nisan, or second occasion, 14th of Iyar. So Tosafot then give an attempt to explain the different Lashon, the different languages there. Okay? Now, we start off our Mishnah then. Erev or Arve Psachim, Samuch LaMincha, close to Mincha. What does it mean? Sorry, close to Mincha. Might we not usually think it should have been from the Mincha and up? Because the time of Mincha would be specific, right? We have a time for Mincha Gedola, a certain number of hours into the day, or a time for Mincha Katana, a certain number of hours in the day. Why, again, the language close to Mincha? So we're going to have to think, is the Gemara going to address this issue as well? In any event, at some point in the afternoon, okay, either beginning exactly at Mincha, or perhaps a half hour before the time of Mincha, the Mishnah tells us, Lo yachel adam ad shetechshach, that a person should not be eating until it gets dark. Then, what does that mean? A second statement. Afilu ani shebi Yisrael, even a poor person, okay? In other words, someone who normally would not have enough money for the usual 2 meals a day, because that was the common practice in the time of Chazal. Lo yachal ad sheyesev, that poor person cannot eat their second meal until they recline. Okay? The customary practice, okay, to be able to eat on sort of on a divan at night, as did people that were free, as did people that were basically well-to-do. Third statement, V'lo yifchatu lo me'arba kosot shel yayin. Now, this seems to be implying 2 possibilities. Either it refers back to the ani, namely that even a poor person should have enough money by some means to be able to afford 4 cups of wine for the Seder at night, or it's a general statement that one should not have, okay, less than 4 cups of wine during the night. Va'afilu min hatamchui, even from the charity plate. Now that is why when we add that second statement, that many want to say the lo yifchatu lo me'arba kosot shel yayin applies directly to the ani, as opposed to people in general. People in general should not be a problem for them to have the means to have 4 cups of wine. But a poor person who must get their food sustenance from the charity plate could have the problem of having adequate funds, okay, to have wine for 4 cups, which would imply that they could have to do other things to get that money, sell their clothes, for example. So Gemara comes back and is going to address us with the following item, namely, notice that our Mishnah said clearly that it dealt with the eve of Pesach, that one doesn't eat till it's dark. And we'll ask the question as we get into the Gemara, is that the only occasion? Mai iria arve psachim? What do we mean when we say, and notice the language comes back to arve psachim, the eves of psachim? Again, whether we say it each year, or we say Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni, like Tosafot. Afilu arve Shabbatot v'yamim tovim nami. Even occasions of before Shabbat, Friday night, or before Yom Tov, also. Why? Tanya, because we have a Braita that teaches, Lo yechel Adam ba'arvei Shabbatot v'yamim tovim, that a person should not eat on the eve of Shabbos or a holiday, min hamincha ulamala, from the time of mincha further on. Notice, by the way, that the Braita uses the language min hamincha,
not samach,
right? As opposed to our Mishnah that used samuch. So we have, we have here the problem then again of the Braita being more specific in the time. Why? However, we'll come back to that. Kadei sheikanes l'Shabbat kashehu ta'ava, divrei Rabbi Yehuda, so that the person enters into Shabbat having an appetite. This is the words of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda would seem to say that it's not just limited to Erev Pesach, but it's other occasions as well. Now, what's the problem here? It may be the fact that it's appropriate to enter Shabbat with an appetite, but we don't have a Torah mandated requirement. On the other hand, regarding Pesach, we do have a Torah mandated requirement, minimally to eat matzah. But what about eating the Korban Pesach? So that could be part of the issue that we'll have to see if the Gemara touches on. Rabbi Yossi Omer, says Rabbi Yossi, Ochel v'holech ad shetechshach. According to Rabbi Yossi, one can continue to eat throughout the afternoon until it gets dark. Now, Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna suggests the following explanation. Lo tzricha ela Rabbi Yossi. Okay, that our Braita clearly, and probably even our Mishnah, was only needed clearly to exclude, okay, the view of Rabbi Yossi. Da'amar ochel v'holech ad shetechshach. Since Rabbi Yossi had the view that one could eat and continue up till dark. And therefore, our Braita certainly says, no, you got to stop for Shabbos and Yontif at mincha time. And our Mishnah said even before mincha time. So therefore, the Gemara continues with Rav Huna's explanation. Hani mili ba'arve Shabbatot v'yamim tovim. These words, namely the Braita, dealt with the eve of Shabbos and holidays. Aval be'erev haPesach, but regarding the eve of Pesach, mishum chiyuva dematzah modeh. But in regards to the eve of Pesach, since we have a Torah obligation to eat matzah, okay, modeh, his Rav Huna says that therefore in that case, Rabbi Yossi would acknowledge and agree that one must stop earlier. But he doesn't tell us, Rav Huna, whether that applies to stopping at mincha time or stopping before mincha time, as our Mishnah says.
Right.
Okay? So it's still not clear what the implication is. Now we see another attempt to explain. Rav Papa Amar, says Rav Papa, afilu tema Rabbi Yehuda. You could even say that our Mishnah, even though I'm putting in, said samuch lemincha, could still be according to Rabbi Yehuda, who in the Braita specifically declared mincha time as the, so to speak, cutoff date. Namely, hatam ba'arvei Shabbatot v'yamim tovim min hamincha ulamalahu da'asir. Okay, there in the Braita, we're saying that when it came to be the eve of Shabbos or a holiday, specifically I'm putting in from the time of mincha and above, it's forbidden. Samuch lemincha shari. But on those occasions, close to the time of mincha, it would be permitted. Aval be'erev haPesach, explains Rav Papa, we make a more stringent separation. Afilu samuch mincha nami asur. Even close to the time of mincha, let's say a half hour before mincha time, also it would be forbidden. So the Gemara is now, so we have two attempts to explain that question of the difference between the Braita and the Mishnah. One was Rav Huna, okay, right? One was Rabbi Yossi. However, the Gemara continues and asks a slightly different question. Ube'erev Shabbat, samuch lemincha shari. So this question comes to challenge Rav Papa's explanation.
Right.
9 hours.
Seem to be, what?
9 hours.
You seem to say that close to mincha it would be permitted. Vahatanya. But aren't we taught elsewhere in another Braita? Lo yachal adam be'erev Shabbat v'yamim tovim mitesha sha'ot ulamala, that a person may not eat the eve of Shabbos or a holiday from the 9th hour of the day and further on, kedei sheyikanes l'Shabbat kashahu ta'ava, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So there, from the 9th hour on, okay, excuse me, so that they have an appetite for their Shabbos or holiday Yontif meal. Now, what would we mean by the 9th hour? If, let's say, we take, for example, that sunrise is at 6 o'clock to make it easy, right? So that would mean from, let's say, from 3 o'clock on, one could not, okay? That would be the view of Rabbi Yehuda. But not only that, again, in this Braita, Rabbi Yehuda is very specific in giving a time frame. So how can we say, therefore, that our Mishnah would be according to Rabbi Yehuda, who didn't give an exact time frame, but said samuch lemincha, close to mincha? Therefore, we have the following. Again, where it said Rabbi Yossi in that Braita said, Ocher v'holech ad sheteksha. So the Gemara now continues. So here we have this issue. Amar Mar Zutra. So Mar Zutra says as follows. Hold on a second. Man lema lan de mitratzta he. Who's saying that we have a correct version of the text? Okay, that's his problem. Maybe we don't have a correct version of the Braita. That would be one possibility. Remember that some brightot were considered inappropriate if they weren't in the Tosefta, the Breita that was arranged by Rabbi Yossi, for example. Or maybe we might even argue that our Mishnah is not the right version. So the Gemara wants to deal with that issue first, and we're just going to go over a little bit to the top of Kaf, Aleph, okay? Dilma mishabashtahi. Perhaps the text is corrupted. It's not an appropriate text. And therefore, Amar le Meramar, Ve'itema Rav Yimar. However, Meramar, and some say it's Rav Yimar, who says as follows: Ana iklai lepirkei de Rav Pinchas berei de Rav Ami. I happened to come, he said, to the lesson that was given before the holidays, right? That was being conducted by Rav Pinchas, the son of Rav Ami. Vikam Tana, and a Tana got up to recite a text. Vatane Kame, and he taught the text before Rav Pinchas. Vikiblamine, and he accepted it. So in other words, that tells us that the text was a valid text. Ihachi Kashya. If that's the case, then we do have a problem, says the Gemara. Because on the one hand, our Mishnah said, Samuch lemincha. On the other hand, the Breita seems to say that if we're trying to explain it like Rabbi Yehuda's view, other cases, Rabbi Yehuda was very specific. Either he said from mincha onwards or from 9 hours onwards. And indeed, hi ihachi kasha, and tomorrow stay tuned for what we'll see to be an attempt to explain the answer. All right, everybody. Thank you for those additional individuals who joined us this morning. And we look forward to you being part of our learning together. Everybody stay well and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a
Everyone
great
have a
day.
good day.
Have a good day.
Stay healthy.
You're all the best.